government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's pull back the curtain and open the door. Get some stuff that's not bought and paid for. Let's herd border to border, coast to coast. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on back into the shut-in, to the self-quarantine. We're in deep quarantine here. I'm hardly going any place or doing anything, folks. I'm picking up my groceries, curbside at the grocery store and getting a bunch at one time so that we don't have to do that very much. And just watching the news, working on the podcasts and talking to folks and collaborating. There's some good things to be done here. I mean, read, get out those books that you've had on the shelf that you haven't been able to get to. There's some good things that can happen in the coronavirus. It's a tragic circumstance, of course, with the illness and deaths that are taking place. But, there's a silver lining to a lot of dark clouds. And I've always told people in my lifetime, it kind of started with the Vietnam War. That kind of woke people up as to what their government was up to. The Gulf of Tonkin was a fabricated incident that never occurred. I mean, Robert McNamara, the guy that reported it, that invented it, says that was true. McNamara also went on to say that the domino theory, the premise of the Vietnam War, was a mistake. He was wrong. Of course, 60,000 U.S. Men and women went to their death over that, but before he died, he admitted that. So, I don't know, is that a silver lining to a dark cloud? That's just one example. We've got others. The O.J. Simpson trial opened people up to the eyes, to open their eyes to the trial system in America. We had the Iraq War, for God's sake. I mean, if that didn't wake you up and make people more likely not to be, twice bitten and twice shy, I don't know what would. Well, I look at this coronavirus thing and I think, I hope it doesn't get as bad as what they're saying that it does. But if it does get even close to that bad, maybe people will revisit science. Maybe they'll start paying attention to what the scientists say. Maybe they'll pay attention to data. And if they're paying attention to scientists, maybe they'll pay attention to the climate scientists. And as you know, that's an often referenced topic. We talk about that a lot here on the podcast. Very concerned about that. I tell everybody, if we don't get it, it's going to get us all. So maybe it'll open some eyes. Maybe there'll be some silver lining to that dark cloud. And that brings us to today's podcast by George guest. It's Jonas Magrum. Now, Jonas is with Climate Action of Iowa, and they're dedicated to educating the public about the dangers of the public crisis and what we can do about it. And they've got a relationship with 350.org, Bill McKibben and those folks. I'm sure you're aware of them, and Climate Reality. And Jonas, welcome to a podcast by George.
Thanks, George. Glad to be here.
So I've conflated that a little bit. Do you see that potential possibility that maybe, that we're going to start paying more attention to science?
Gee, George, I love your theory, and I'd like to think so, but, I've been a climate activist for many years, and clearly my climate denial, if you will, has nothing to do with science whatsoever. So I don't know that this crisis will get us any further down the road of people respecting scientists and scientific findings. I'd like to think so, but there are still people who share the same ideology as climate deniers who are saying that this coronavirus thing has been overblown and exaggerated and is not really dangerous for America. And it's a liberal conspiracy to build government and spend money. So I can't say that I share your optimism, but I like it, and I hope I catch it.
I hope you're right. And again, I always, with conspiracy theories, I always tell folks, Okay, so the number one test for a conspiracy theory is ask the question why. Why would somebody like Podcast by George, or why would somebody like Jonas Magrum want more government spending, would want bigger government? How does that benefit us or the people that are sounding the alarm about climate? What's their benefit in all this? I mean, to be real brutally, kind of ugly honest about you, guys like us, we're kind of getting to the end of the road. We're probably going to survive or ride out the climate crisis before the worst of it happens, perhaps.
Definitely.
It's concern out of the for the future generations.
Well, so yeah, I saw there's I think a guy called the Redneck Liberal on Facebook, and he was asking the same questions and said, who's promoting this conspiracy theory? Big Bicycle.
Yeah.
So
Big
yeah,
green, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
This question, though, George, of what's behind climate denial and what is behind the rejection of the virus science that led to, at an absolute minimum, a huge exacerbation of its impact on our country. And that's a really an important question because it's not limited to just this issue or that issue. It's rooted in my opinion. Well, I don't know if you want to talk about that. This is your show, so you tell
No,
me
go
if you want to
ahead.
go
Yeah.
there. All right. Well, in my observation and opinion, there are the two predominant forces in the rejection of science are number one, anti-government, anti-spending ideology. So the ideology is a cult, in my view, and it overtakes any sense of reason or respect for science. And consequently, people only see the world through the eyes of government spending and government growth. And anything that requires government to spend money, as the climate crisis certainly does, or the growth of government, which I guess in a way are the same, two ways of saying the same thing, they're unilaterally rejected, no matter how much scientific opinion, or I should say research, published facts, there may be that fly in the face of that idea, that rejection. So that's number one. It's an ideology that that trumps, if I could use that word without getting sick to my stomach, that trumps fact and reason. And the second reason I've observed, which is related to the first, do you want to chime in or should I just go on?
Well, no, and I would, I've always kind of, as a matter of fact, I had a post today on Facebook, ironically, where I kind of was on the same rail as you are. And what I said was, the past generations, that World War II generation, really getting to be people's grandparents, they had a deep appreciation for science because they had seen, the invention of the electric light bulb almost with Thomas Edison, the telephone, the TVA, for God's sake, the Hoover Dam, and most importantly, maybe, the atom bomb. That made them believers in science. It was right in their faces. Well, then the next generations came. They didn't have to deal with wars and horrific things like that bomb, and they kind of got soft and self-indulgent, and they kind of settled down, and they've kind of turned away and ignored science, and it's kind of led to where we're at today. That's the way that I was looking at it.
That could be a contributing factor. There are a couple other another contributing factor before I get to that second theory is that our children's generation really is the first generation that is expected to have a lower standard of living than ours.
Yeah.
And so as wealth has accumulated among a handful of people, certainly no more than 1% in America, then the quality of life for everybody else is going down. And so people are more susceptible to conspiracy theories and finger pointing, as were the Germans when Hitler came to power. The economic crisis that Germany was facing was blamed on the Jews. So let's get rid of the Jews. Had no foundation in fact. It was just and in the same way that conservative pundits now point their finger at liberals. We're the cause of the suffering of society, not the fact that tens of millions of Americans have been left out of any hope of even being able to make a decent living, let alone realizing what we used to call the American dream. So, but the other thing I wanted to mention is what I call tribal think. And what, you know, in the old days, George, old days, even before you and I were born, which was a long time ago, if you went against the tribe, you got thrown out or killed. Either way, it was a death sentence. Because if you got thrown out and there were wild animals running around, you know, without the tribe to fight them together, you're dead. And so it's very much built into our DNA that you don't go against the tribe. And I live in Iowa, we've seen farmers interviewed with their thousands of acres underwater because of the Mississippi overflowing. And as soon as you mention climate change, they just clam up completely. They're scared to death of acknowledging something that will cause them to be rejected by the conservative tribe. So these factors are working together. And so my hope, really, as a climate activist, is not so much in persuading these hardcore ideologues that climate change is real, but to activate, energize, inspire those of us who understand and respect science and who recognize that there's a danger, but who are kind of sitting back, letting somebody else fight the fight. So that's where my hope is. It's engaging more people who like us, who just, you know, like people thank me all the time. Oh, thank you for every, you know, I don't want their thanks. I want them to stand with me on the front lines. And that's the way I think many climate activists, or most of us, do feel.
That's right. And you are on the front lines. This guy walks it like he talks it, folks. Jonas Magrum. Well, you know, I would say this. The context that I always put it in is people need to. I just hope you're right, Jonas. I just hope that it doesn't take 1.5 million deaths. That's what some people are projecting from this coronavirus to get people to come around and understand that the next grave threat, and the one that we're confronting and fighting right now, is climate crisis. And before we end our interview today, I wanted to get to some really, every day this news cycle is just changing. Have you heard much about the fact that Trump is dropping all of any remaining EPA guidelines and things to protect the environment for this coronavirus, and how that can be? It's crazy. I tell folks, and I had a show on here recently about the bailout. And I said, you know, you got to look at it this way. When they offer you something, look at what they're taking. And most importantly, think of the magic act. Think of the magician. And I pointed this out. You know, he gets you to look at his right hand and then watch what he's doing with his left hand. That's the most important thing if you want to know how the sleight of hand is accomplished, if you want to know how the trick is done. Well, Trump now is got, you know, everybody's focused on coronavirus and they're concerned about that. And he's pulling the rug out from the environment.
Yeah, there's no surprise, right? And he's doing so under the guise of helping the economy recover, you know, helping businesses recover. And like the automotive industry will be threatened if we don't roll back mileage standards. It's absolutely absurd. It is counterproductive in terms of the health and well-being, safety of Americans and the whole world, for that matter. And you know, George, Can you imagine when you were a teenager, if you told your mom and dad that the average American was going to be spending $1,000 on water to drink a year?
Uh,
They would have thought you were crazy. But the bottom line is that I think there's a lot of good in capitalism, but there is, as Al Gore first pointed out, there's no line on the profit and loss statement that accounts for environmental depreciation or degradation. And so that's what regulations are built to do. They're built to modify this wild uh, uh, pursuit of wealth so that it does take into account the health and well-being, the sustainability or the ability of our environment to sustain us. Capitalism doesn't do that by itself. It's just too short-sighted. Stock companies, public companies, they're all competing to show the biggest profits because otherwise equity, people sell that stock and move it to a place that has faster, bigger profits. So the whole market is pressured to ignore these expenses and to ignore the costs of protecting the environment for future generations. That's what we see today.
And there's no precedent for it, is what I tell people. It does not work. It's worse than no precedent. We've proven that it doesn't work. We've done these bailouts, the three major ones, trillions of dollars, and they're talking about already having to do something different. Meanwhile, what is the precedent that does work? Well, the New Deal. I mean, FDR, that worked, folks. The Great Society of LBJ with Medicare, that worked. I mean, why do we keep going to things that obviously don't work with the government having to save capitalism in America, restructure it, revamp it, redo it, New Deal it? I mean, that would be my solution or approach, but we seem to be very reluctant to do that.
It's because it will cost the wealthiest money. It can't be done without increasing tax on the wealthiest among us. But so they are happy. You know, you read stories, some of these folks are already jetting away to their private bunkers on some private island somewhere to avoid the coronavirus, while the rest of us deal with shortages of medical supplies and testing. And, you know, they're happy to do that. And you know, I don't think I would be, but I don't know because I'm not a billionaire. But the bottom line is, our media is controlled predominantly by a handful of billionaires. Rupert Murdoch, of course, and their concern is to protect their wealth. That's it. And so what they do, you want to hear a conspiracy theory? I have one. My theory is that these billionaires don't give a damn about abortion. They don't give a damn about gun owners' rights, but they have locked on to those issues in order to enroll and control and to cement the loyalty of millions of American voters who are being hurt economically by these policies, but who are loyal because of these hot button issues that these billionaires have conflated with their political ideologies. That's my conspiracy.
That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a reality that we're all living today, Jonas. And I tell people, and this bailout is top of mind with me. But if you give control, direction of the country, if you make us a corporate America, which we are, including our media, everything in this country is run by corporations. Well, they're publicly owned corporations. In their very charters, in their very bylaws, it's very specific about what their focus is, what their mission is. Their mission statement is to benefit themselves and their shareholders financially. Period. End of the story. they really can't do anything else. Matter of fact, if they do, let's say that a CEO takes an action to benefit gun owners or women with abortion or something like that outside of that charter, they'll be sued. They'll lose everything they've got. They can't do that. They've got to do what's explicitly stated. It's the entire premise of the system. It's how it's completely set up, top to bottom, financial benefit, and the rest of us be damned. I mean, you got that right. I'm going to have to wrap it up today. I got to tell folks, I love Jonas's hat and his green screen background there that looks like Hawaii. I've been there. My God, that's beautiful. And you know, the earth is such a beautiful place. And again, I hope maybe we'll start paying attention and get something done on this climate crisis thing. Jonas, I'll give you a last word here before we head out today. Give us some closing thoughts.
All right, George. The first thought I have is that every one of your listeners, we need every one of your listeners to step up their climate resistance. You can join groups like 350.org or even Greenpeace, because, or even Sierra Club for that matter. But we need, please don't sit on the sidelines and leave this existential fight to a handful of old fogies like me. And reach out to young people, listen to them, but speak truth to power, either by talking to your friend, or I want to include that, talk to your friends regularly about your concerns about climate. You don't need to be a scientific expert, just express your concerns. And the second thing is, do what you can to enroll young people, get them engaged, support them, listen to them. It's their future. And George, thank you for fighting the good fight in your own way.
And we do what we can, and this is my little piece of it, and we'll come back and visit with you again because you've got a big piece of it. Folks, that's Jonas Magrum. He's with Climate Action of Iowa. They're dedicated to educating the public about the dangers of the climate crisis and the solutions we got to implement to avert those dangers. And as he mentioned, they've got a relationship with 350.org, that brilliant group, and Climate Reality and others. And we want to, again, spread the word, share this podcast, get it out on all the various platforms. We're on YouTube. We're getting a lot of visibility there now. Of course, Facebook, we've been big on for some time now, but also on Twitter and Spotify. And my God, any place podcasts are seen or heard, you can find us. We're going to wrap it up today. We're going to move along. We're going to hunker down and sequester in Memphis, as that saying goes. I think that's a Hold Steady song. We are under quarantine here. Yeah, thank you. All right, Jonas. That's another podcast, folks. Bye, George.